They say the dead in Briar's hollow cemetery do not stay buried. But that was never the part that terrified people most. The real warning, the one whispered by locals with shaken voices and locked doors, was far worse. If you ever hear your own name called from inside that abandoned graveyard after midnight, do not answer. Do not turn around and do not let it know you heard it, because whatever speaks from beneath those graves is not a ghost, not a spirit, and not something that was ever human. At the edge of a dying town, hidden behind miles of rotten trees and washed-out roads, Briar's hollow cemetery had been abandoned for nearly a century, left to sink into the earth like a bad memory everyone wanted erased. The iron gate was rusted open. The gravestones leaned at strange angles as if trying to pull away from the center. And in the middle of the cemetery stood the crumbling remains of an old chapel, with no roof, no cross, and no birds nesting anywhere near it. During the day it looked eerie, but at night it became something else entirely. Fog rolled in even when the sky was clear. Bells rang underground where no bells should exist. Shadow figures appeared between the tombstones and vanished when you stared too long. People claimed they saw faces pressing up beneath the dirt as if something under the cemetery was trying to push the dead upward like puppets. Others swore the names carved into the headstones changed overnight, and that sometimes, if you walked deep enough into the cemetery, you would find your own name etched into a grave that had not been there the day before. For years, it was just another town legend. To me, another paranormal story dragged out to scare teenagers until the night my sister vanished inside those gates. Ellie had always chased haunted places the way other people chased thrills. She loved abandoned hospitals, cursed roads, old churches, and every story that hinted at the supernatural. She said fear made people honest, that haunted places peeled the world back and showed what was really underneath. When she heard about Briar's hollow cemetery, she became obsessed. She spent days digging through old newspaper archives and town records, and what she found only made her want to go more. In 1911, the cemetery had been closed after a string of unexplained deaths connected to the chapel at its center. Not murders, not illness. People were simply found dead near the graves, their faces frozen in horror, dirt packed under their fingernails, and their mouths hanging open as if they had died, trying to scream something no one could hear. The priest who once served the chapel disappeared. The groundskeeper was found kneeling before the altar with both hands broken and his eyes burned white. Then, after one stormy autumn night, the town sealed the cemetery and abandoned it. No official reason was ever given. No church records explained it. It was as if the town had made a silent agreement to bury the truth with the bodies already there. Ellie called me the night she went. She was laughing at first, teasing me, telling me she'd finally found a place that felt truly cursed. She said the air outside the gate already felt wrong, too cold for October, too still, like the whole place was holding its breath. Then she sent me a short video from inside her car. The cemetery entrance was barely visible in her headlights, framed by crooked stones and dead branches that looked like claws. She turned the camera toward herself, smiling. But behind her, past the fogged rear window, I saw something standing between two graves. It was tall and narrow and blacker than the night around it, with a shape like a man wearing funeral clothes that hung too long and too loose from its body. I told her to leave immediately. She laughed and said, "If it follows me home, I'll let you know." That was the last normal thing I ever heard from her An hour later, her camera feed was recovered from the cloud. The footage began with her stepping through the gate, flashlight shaking slightly, joking under her breath about how even the trees sounded dead there. At first, it was just typical haunted place footage. Broken headstones, weeds swallowing graves, old statues with faces half eroded by time. But then the sound started. Whispering, not wind, not leaves, voices, hundreds of them, layered so softly they almost hid inside the static, speaking too low to understand. Ellie's breathing changed. Her jokes stopped. She kept turning the camera over, her shoulder as if someone was following her, but the lens only caught quick flashes of fog moving strangely between the graves, almost like it was alive. The deeper she went, the worse the footage became. Her flashlight began cutting out in short bursts. The names on the headstones became impossible to read because the letters looked scratched over and recarved, as if each grave had been renamed over and over again. Then she reached the chapel. The moment she stepped inside, the audio distorted so badly it sounded like the microphone was underwater. The camera pointed at the cracked altar, and sitting on top of it was a neat circle of objects left by previous visitors, prayer beads, old toys, candles melted into bone-colored wax, faded photographs, and in the very center, an open grave marker no bigger than a child's coffin lid with one name carved into it, her own. Ellie gasped. The camera jerked. Then a voice spoke from behind her, clear as day, soft and patient, and not human at all. It said, "You came back." Ellie turned so fast the footage blurred. In the far corner of the chapel stood a little girl in a white burial dress, her face hidden beneath dark hair hanging to her chest. She looked small, fragile, almost harmless, until the hair shifted and showed there were no eyes underneath, only black hollow sockets full of crawling darkness. Ellie screamed and dropped the camera. It landed tilted sideways, still recording the chapel floor, and in that angle I watched dozens of bare feet step silently into frame around her. Small feet, old feet, swollen feet, gray feet caked in mud, all of them circling her, while something underneath the chapel began to knock from below like fists pounding on a coffin lid. Then the feet ended. By sunrise, Ellie's car was found, outside the gate with the door hanging open and the keys still in the ignition. The police searched the cemetery for 2 days and found nothing, no blood, no footprints, no sign of where she had gone. The town acted like it had happened before. No one said that out loud, but I could see it in their faces. They were not shocked. They were afraid in a way that felt practiced, like Briar's hollow cemetery had been taking people for a long time, and everyone had learned not to say its name too loudly. 2 weeks later, I went there myself. Maybe it was guilt, maybe denial, maybe I needed to prove to myself that Ellie was still alive and trapped somewhere inside. I waited until night because that was when she vanished, and some part of me believed the paranormal thing that took her would only reveal itself in darkness. The moment I passed through the gate, I felt it, an unnatural pressure in the air, like walking underwater. My ears rang, my skin went cold. Every sound outside the cemetery seemed to disappear, replaced by a terrible silence, broken only by the crunch of dead leaves and something dragging slowly through the grass far away. My flashlight barely worked. The beam looked weak and sickly, as if the darkness was swallowing it. Graves appeared and disappeared in the fog. Statues looked different every time I passed them. One angel near the path had no face the first time I saw it, and when I looked back a few seconds later, its features were there, worn but visible. Its stone eyes pointed directly at me. Then the whispering began. At first, it sounded like random voices, but the farther I walked, the clearer it became. They were saying names, dozens of names, then hundreds. The dead, I realized, were not whispering to scare me. They were repeating the names of everyone buried there, over and over, like a prayer, like a warning, like they were trying desperately not to forget who they had once been. When I reached the chapel, it looked far worse than in Ellie's footage. The stone walls were slick with moisture, though it had not rained. The altar was streaked with dark stains that looked too old to be blood and too fresh to be harmless. The objects still lay in their circle, untouched. But now there were more of them, including Ellie's necklace and one of her shoes. And on the wall behind the altar, scratched so deeply into the stone, it looked carved by bone rather than metal, were the words, "It calls them by name." Then the bells began. Not above, not in any tower, but under the ground. Deep, slow, impossible bells, tolling from somewhere beneath the chapel floor. The dirt all around me trembled. Dust fell from the walls, and from outside came the sound of graves opening. I stepped out of the chapel and saw movement everywhere. Figures stood between the tombstones now, dozens at first, then what looked like hundreds. Men in rotted burial suits, women in black veils, children clutching broken toys, all pale and still and staring at me with eyes too empty to be natural. They did not move like normal apparitions. They flickered, vanishing from one place and appearing closer the next, like frames missing from a film. Then I saw Ellie. She stood near a sunken grave at the far end of the cemetery, barefoot, motionless, her white shirt stained with dirt, her hair hanging in wet strands around her face. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. I shouted her name, and the entire cemetery went silent. Every ghost turned toward me at once. Ellie lifted her head, and the smile she gave me made my blood go cold because it was wide, wrong, and utterly empty of humanity. "You should not have done that," she said, but the voice that came out of her mouth was not hers. It was layered, ancient, crowded with other voices speaking at the same time. The grave beneath her split open with a wet cracking sound. One by one, more graves around the cemetery began to rupture from within. Hands pushed through the dirt. Faces emerged beneath torn burial cloth. The dead were not rising to attack me. They were being forced upward, dragged awake by something beneath them. Ellie jerked unnaturally, her head tilting too far as if strings were pulling from underground. Then the soil around the chapel caved in, and a massive pit opened at its center, exposing a hollow beneath the cemetery so vast it could have swallowed the whole graveyard. The walls of it were lined not with earth but with old coffins fused together, roots threaded through bone, skulls packed into the mud like stones in a foundation. And at the bottom, slowly moving, was the thing the town had abandoned the cemetery to contain. It was enormous, half-buried, wrapped in funeral shrouds so old they had blackened with rot, with a body grown into the roots and coffins like the cemetery itself had sprouted from its flesh. Its face was hidden beneath a crown of branches and bones, but when it breathed, every corpse above it twitched. When it exhaled, the whispering returned all at once, only now I understood the truth. It was not the dead speaking. It was the thing below using their mouths. It fed on names, on memory, on the living being remembered by the dead. That was why the gravestones changed. That was why the town stopped speaking of the place. The more a name was spoken in Briar's hollow cemetery, the stronger the thing beneath it became. And when I screamed Ellie's name, I had given it exactly what it wanted. The ghosts surged forward. Hands burst from the ground and grabbed my ankles. The dead stumbled from open graves, their mouths moving soundlessly while that thing below called to me in a voice like wet earth sliding over stone. Ellie began walking toward me, twitching with each step, her body jerking like something inside her was trying to wear her correctly and failing. She reached out with the fingers bent wrong and whispered, "It knows you now." Then, for just 1 second, I saw the real Ellie underneath it, trapped behind her eyes, terrified and sobbing silently. I lunged for her. The moment I touched her hand, the cemetery screamed. Every ghost opened its mouth at once. The bells underneath became frantic. The thing below surged upward, dragging roots and bones with it, and I felt Ellie's body convulse as whatever had been inside her fought to stay. I pulled with everything I had. Mud sucked at my boots, dead hands clawed at my legs. The air smelled like open graves and burned incense and something older than death. Then Ellie screamed in her real voice, and whatever possessed her tore free in a burst of cold so brutal it felt like winter had exploded from her chest. The black shape shot upward into the fog and vanished. But the thing beneath the chapel roared, a deep, monstrous sound that shook every stone in the cemetery. The graves collapsed inward. Statues shattered. The pit widened. Ellie and I ran. Behind us came the sound of thousands of bodies dragging through the dirt, and over all of it, that impossible voice kept calling our names over and over. Softer now, almost loving, as if promising that one day it would finish what it started. We reached the gate just as the iron bars slammed shut behind Tindus on their own. The moment we crossed onto the road, the fog vanished. The bells stopped. The cemetery stood still and silent again, innocent as a ruin under moonlight. Ellie survived, but she never came back whole. She remembers the dead standing in rows around her, whispering their names so they wouldn't be stolen. And she remembers something underneath the chapel, promising her that abandoned places belong to it because forgotten things are easier to keep. The town sealed the road a month later after the chapel collapsed into itself. But people still go missing near Briar's Hollow, especially the ones who go looking for paranormal proof. And some nights, when the world is quiet and the ground feels too still, Ellie wakes up crying because she hears slow bells ringing from somewhere under the house, followed by a voice beneath the floorboards, patient and hungry, whispering her name exactly the way it did in that cemetery, like it never let her go, like it is still down there in the dark among the graves, waiting for someone else to answer.